Welcome back. Self-join. Self-join is a specific type of join where a table is joined with itself. So for example, if you have an employee table, so employee table can be joined with the same table to get some of the results that we are looking for. So in case of self-join, you will use the aliases to differentiate between the columns of the table, and the join condition is typically involves the columns representing the relationship with the same table. Self-joins are useful for a hierarchical or recursive structures within the single table. In case of self-join, there is no word called self-join, but we will be achieving the self-join using the join, the inner join concept that we have. So for example, if you have a table alias, so the same alias table, alias 1 and alias 2, so the same table that you have, and and you will fetch the columns that are required for this same table, and the condition that we use, which is on the same table, so alias 1 of column name is equals to alias 2 of column name. So for this specific use case, let's try to look how we get these details. For example, if we are going to execute the query, so this is the sample query that we have in case of self-join, where what we are doing, we are getting the employee. So we are getting from employee, and I'm giving the alias name of EMP, and again we are joining the same employee table with alias name emp2 and trying to get emp.employee name equal to emp2.employee name, and where the employee id is common. So whenever you have emp.employee id equals to emp.employee id, emp2.employee id. So if we execute this query, this is exactly the self join, but this doesn't give a meaning of what exactly we are doing on this, right? So we might not be having a scenario where get the names twice in any table. But for that reason, what I will do, I will try to create a new table altogether. Okay, so which I am saying that employee data. Okay, this employee data table, what it happens is basically, so employee data table, let me refresh here. You have the employee data table. So in case of employee data table, you have the columns, which is an employee id, employee name, supervisor id. Okay, and I will also insert the data that is required into the table. Okay, so then once we insert the data into the required into the table, then data is there, right? So the next thing that you do, let's look into the records that we have. Select star from employee employees underscore data. So if you see the data that we have in the employees, so you have the records on the table, right? So what we have, the column 2 is actually having the employee name, and column 3 is actually having the supervisor id. Supervisor id itself is the same id that we have in this table, right? So the same employee id that we have in this table. For example, so if you see, select employees data. So if you see, employee id 1 is reporting to employee id 2, which is John Smith. Employee id 2 is reporting to employee id 3, John Bob. Employee id 3 is reporting to employee id 2, and 4 is reporting to 2, and blah blah blah. Like that we have the combination, right? So for this combination, let's use the self-join query and try to get what are the details that we are looking for. What we want to know out of this table is, so we want to get the employee name, we want to take the employee name and his supervisor name by having the self join. So basically what we are doing, we are taking the employee data, we are getting the employee name out of employee data, and what we are doing is same employees data, we are taking joining with employees data, and where we are getting supervisor id is equal to the s.employee id. So wherever you have the employee data, supervisor id is equal to s.employee id. So we are fetching all those names of the all those names of the users and just trying to get the supervisor name out of it, right? This is the very specific use case we might regularly get. So in this case, basically I can see that John Doe is reporting to John Smith, John Smith is reporting to John Bob, and John Bob reporting to John Smith, and blah blah blah, like that, right? So the different reporting persons that we have for John Walter and Brian Tracy, but John Walter and John Peter is reporting to the same person, and John Bob and John Peter is reporting to John Smith only, right? So that's how the self join will be useful. So if you take our exact implementation, whatever the earlier implementation that you have, so we have something called some table called employee underscore reporting, right? Select star from employee underscore reporting. This is the another use case where you will have the self join that you might need to have, right? So if you see in case of employee reporting, what you have is you have an employee ID and their supervisor ID. So this similar use case whatever we have, but we have it in different table, right? This might be also one of the use case. In this case, what we have to do, we have to join the multiple tables, but we have to use the same concept of self joining, right? So for example, I'm trying to get employee name and supervisor name from the employee reporting table, right? So I'll be forming an employee name and supervisor name, okay? And but I have that in the employee reporting table. But what I am trying to do here is, so I'm trying to join the employee table on the report ID and employee ID, and I'm joining the same employee table on supervisor ID and employee ID. So what it gives to me, okay, what it gives to me is actually the employees who are reporting to the supervisor, respective supervisor. So I'm getting the employee name and the supervisor name and trying to display the uh, the two columns that I'm looking for, right? So with that said, so what we can do, you don't need to have inner join here, so you can still have the join keyword, that can be the default, or if you want to use inner join, you can still use the inner join. So in a summary, the self join can be used with one table or multiple table, but anytime that you want to join the table with the same table, so then the self join concept will be in the place, right? So with that said, we will stop here on the self join, and with this the self join, we have covered all the joins that are possible with the MySQL, and we'll try to go and look into the new other concepts of MySQL in the coming sessions. Thank you.